Eli Ward drove the first round clay, lid level with the dry soil between two raspberry canes. And his Uncle Ray laughed before Eli had even brushed the dirt from his knees. "You're burying flower pots in a berry field now." Eli looked down the row instead of answering. The raspberry leaves nearest the end of the block hung softer than they had a week earlier. The farm still had water, but not enough time or flexibility to keep sending short irrigation runs across every dry corner whenever plants showed stress. Some watering spread beyond the shallow feeding roots, while other patches dried again before the next turn. That was what Eli had been watching. Ray saw only 30 unglazed clay pots stacked beside the field. Dana Ward saw something else. She saw a 17-year-old asking for responsibility over irrigation after spending most of the spring being told he was not ready for it. Dana owned the land. She controlled the water schedule, approved digging, handled sales, and made the final operating decisions. She had already told Eli twice that he could help check lines, but he would not run irrigation himself. Then he arrived with the clay pots. He had bought them with wages saved from odd jobs around the farm. That changed the conversation just enough for Dana to give him one chance. "One row," she said. Eli nodded. "Supervised." He nodded again. "And you don't dig anywhere else unless I approve it." "I understand." Ray shook his head. 30 pots for one row. 6 for the test," Eli said. "The rest stay stacked." That answer made Dana pause. Eli had expected resistance, so he had reduced the idea to something small enough to fail without costing the farm much. Dana pointed toward the driest section of the raspberry block. "One row. 6 pots. You keep records. If the plants look worse, we stop." That was all the authority Eli had. It was enough. He dug beside the raspberry plants and lowered the unglazed pots into the soil, leaving only their narrow openings and clay lids accessible at the surface. Water inside the porous clay was supposed to move gradually through the walls as the surrounding soil dried. It seemed almost too simple. That was exactly why Ray distrusted it. "You know we have hoses," Ray called. "I noticed. An irrigation pipe." "I noticed that too." "Then why are you planting cookware?" Dana looked at Ray. Let him finish. The laughter stopped, but not the doubt. Eli filled each buried pot carefully, replaced the lids, and pushed small marked stakes into the soil so he could identify every location later. Dana stepped closer. "How often are you filling them?" "That's what I need to find out." "You don't know?" "I know what I expect." "That wasn't my question." Eli stood. "No, I don't know yet." For a moment, he thought that answer might end the experiment. Instead, Dana nodded. "Good." Ray frowned. Dana pointed at the row. "Because if he'd said he already knew, I'd shut this down." Eli understood. He had not been given a row to prove clay pots were magical. He had been given a row to measure whether they worked there. That afternoon, the soil immediately around the pots felt cooler below the surface. The change was modest, but Eli marked it in a small notebook. He drew 6 circles. Beside each, he wrote the refill time. Then he looked toward the remaining 24 pots stacked near the shed. He could have asked for another row. He did not. The first 6 had to earn that. By the following morning, Eli was back before breakfast. He lifted the first lid. The water level had dropped much more than he expected. The second was low too. The third nearly the same. Eli crouched beside the row. The soil surface was already warming. He had buried the pots far enough to hold them upright and cover most of the clay, but not deeply enough to escape the hottest upper layer. Fine surface roots were concentrating around the damp zones. The system was releasing water. That part worked. It was releasing it too quickly. Ray appeared at the end of the row carrying a wrench. "Well." Eli did not answer immediately. Ray looked inside one pot. "That seems quick." It is. So the garden trick is thirsty. Eli replaced the lid. He could have argued. Instead, he wrote down the level. By midday, the failure was clear. The pots were not staying useful long enough to give Eli the slow reserve he had imagined. Heat was working against the shallow installation, and surface roots were pulling hard from the concentrated damp zones. Dana came out after lunch. Eli showed her the notebook. "You'd have to keep filling these," she said. "Yes." "How often?" "Too often." "Then this doesn't solve our problem." "Not like this." Dana looked at him. The words mattered. "Not like this." "Not. It doesn't work." Dana handed back the notebook. "You still have one row." Eli looked up. "That means I can change it?" "It means you can test it. You're not expanding it." Ray gave a quiet laugh. "What's left to test? Bury them, fill them, empty by tomorrow." Eli looked at the nearest clay lid. The pot beneath it was releasing water. The question was whether he had placed that water in the wrong part of the soil. "I buried them too shallow." Ray stopped walking. Dana studied him. Eli pointed toward the remaining pots. "I want to test deeper placement and wider spacing." "Why wider?" Dana asked. "Because right now I'm concentrating too much moisture near the surface. I need to see whether fewer, deeper points hold longer where the roots can use them." "You're moving the 6? "Not yet. I want the shallow ones left, as they are long enough to compare." For the first time since he carried the pots into the field, Ray did not have a joke ready. Dana approved changes only within the same supervised row. No second row. No control of irrigation. No promise that the remaining pots would ever leave the stack. Eli had begun wanting to prove everyone wrong. Now he had a harder question. Could he make the same small reserve last for several dry days? The next morning, he started with a shovel and narrow soil probe and the 6 plants already under test. The upper soil was dry and loose. Deeper down, it still held some coolness. That difference mattered. The shallow pots had been feeding the hottest layer first. Eli checked the root zone and marked what he found in his notebook. Dana watched him work. "You think deeper fixes everything?" "No." "Then what does it fix?" "Maybe the part one caused." That answer kept her listening. The raspberry block was entering its driest stretch before bloom. Every irrigation turn required time, hose movement, and attention. The farm did not have an unlimited supply. Eli's idea was not to create more water. It was to keep a small amount closer to the root zone and release it gradually. But unless the pots stayed useful for several days, they would only create another chore. Dana made that clear. "I'm not approving something that needs somebody standing here filling pots twice a day." "I know." "And the rest stay stacked until this row proves something." "I know." Ray came through carrying fittings and glanced at the inspection holes. "Now we're studying dirt." You could run the regular irrigation in less time than he spent digging around 6 bushes. "For today," Dana said. Ray shrugged. "That's usually when plants need water." Eli understood the point. A system that conserved water but consumed too much labor was not a solution. He set the next pots deeper and farther apart, leaving only their necks and lids accessible. Then he filled them, marked their starting levels, and stopped. "No more?" Ray asked. "Not today. You've got all those pots sitting there. That doesn't mean I know where they belong." Eli marked comparison points along the row. He needed one practical answer. Was the deeper arrangement actually slowing the loss? By evening, the difference was encouraging. The deeper pots had dropped less than the shallow ones had during their first hot day. The soil near them still felt cool below the surface. But one came between 2 wider-spaced pots was showing more stress than plants closer to the clay. The next morning confirmed both sides of the result. Deeper placement helped. Spacing too far apart created another problem. Dana looked at the softer plant. So deeper helps? Yes. But farther apart can go too far. Yes. You changed two things at once. Eli knew what she meant. He had improved the overall result, but he had made it harder to separate the effects of depth and spacing. His first prototype had failed because he was too shallow. His correction could fail differently if he stretched spacing just to reduce labor. I need to narrow the gap. Ray shook his head. First too close, now too far. Eli nodded. Right. That surprised Ray. Eli no longer needed every criticism to be wrong. Some of it was useful information. Over the next several days, he stopped thinking of the pots as individual objects. He began thinking in zones. One deeper pot could support the soil around it longer than the shallow version had, but if he stretched the distance too far, the driest plants between pots weakened first. He narrowed the spacing enough to overlap the useful damp zones without returning to the crowded shallow pattern. Then he added simple reference marks inside the pot necks. Not precise measuring scales, just repeatable points. Each time he checked a pot, he could compare the water level against the same mark. Ray found him kneeling with a notebook. You still writing down when your flower pots get thirsty? Yes. What's that supposed to tell you? If one empties faster than the others, then you fill it. Or I ask why. Ray gave him a doubtful look. Eli opened one lid. This one dropped faster yesterday. So. The plant beside it wasn't more stressed. Ray waited. That means the water may be going somewhere else. Leak. Maybe loose soil around the pot. Maybe heavier roots. Maybe the pot itself. You planning to interrogate every piece of clay? No. I'm planning to notice when one behaves differently. Dana heard that from the lane. The records stay, she said. Ray smiled. Congratulations. He's been promoted to pot accountant. Dana did not smile. If we use something we can't monitor, we don't know when it stops working. That evening brought the hottest conditions since Eli had started. Leaves on the untreated edge of the block showed stress earlier in the afternoon. The corrected test row held better. One pot, however, had dropped farther than the others. Eli pressed gently around its neck. The soil on one side gave too easily. It had not settled tightly against the pot after repositioning. He firmed the soil carefully and noted the change. The next morning, the drop had slowed. That was when the system began to feel understandable. Not perfect. Understandable. The clay did not behave like a pipe delivering the same amount on command. It responded to the surrounding soil. Depth mattered. Placement mattered. Contact mattered. An unusual refill rate could warn Eli about a problem before the plant showed severe stress. The next 4 dry days became the real test. Eli resisteva expansion. He checked the same row at roughly the same times. He recorded refill behavior. He watched leaf posture. He checked moisture below the dry surface without repeatedly disturbing the roots. On the second day, the deeper zones still held useful moisture. On the third, the levels continued falling gradually rather than disappearing in a rush. By the 4th dry day, Dana walked the row with him. She crouched beside one cane, pushed her fingers below the dry surface, and found cooler soil underneath. Ray came through carrying a coil of hose. Dana called him over. She pointed first toward the untreated edge, then toward Eli's test row. The difference was not miraculous. Up close, it was clear. The untreated plants showed more midday stress. The test row had stayed steadier. Ray lifted a lid. You filled these this morning? No. Yesterday? No. Ray looked at the notebook. For dry days. His expression changed. Not admiration. Calculation. Dana stood. Don't move anything. Eli blinked. I wasn't going to. I know. She looked toward the unused pots. For now. That was the closest thing to approval he had received. He had not won control of irrigation. He had proven only that the corrected placement could hold useful moisture longer than the shallow version and reduce refill frequency. Then June Mercer came to the farm looking for strawberries. She left talking about raspberries. June ran a produce stand on the highway and bought small seasonal lots from nearby farms. That morning, she noticed Eli kneeling between the canes. "What are those lids?" Ray answered first. "His underground flower pots." June stepped off the lane. "Underground what?" Dana looked at Eli. "Show her." Eli lifted a lid and explained the idea simply. June touched the dry surface soil. "You watered this row today?" "No." "Yesterday?" "No." He showed her the refill record. She walked farther down the row and pressed her fingers into the soil. Dry at the surface. Cooler below. "How many rows are you doing like this?" "1." Ray laughed. 6 pots have conquered agriculture. Dana ignored him. June looked toward the block. "When do these berries come in?" "Dana and Sard." "If the bloom holds and the weather doesn't punish us, we should have a small picking window later. I could use a local raspberry display." Dana's expression changed. "How much?" "Not huge. Enough for a featured table if the fruit is good." 5 minutes earlier, Eli's test row had been evidence. Now it was pressure. June looked at Dana. "I'd reserve the space if you think you can supply it." Dana studied the dry block, then the unused pots. A successful row was one thing. Expansion before bloom was another. "We're not doing the whole block," she said. She pointed toward a limited section near Eli's test. "If we expand, we protect only what we can reasonably manage." June nodded. "That's enough for a smaller display." Ray looked at Eli. "Well, congratulations. Your flower pots have a customer." Eli barely heard him. He was thinking about labor. 6 pots were easy to refill individually. Expansion meant more lids, more filling time, more chances to miss a problem. Dana seemed to read his face. "You wanted more responsibility." "I do." "Then don't tell me only why it can work." Eli pointed toward the hose connection uphill. "One shared fill hose. Low flow. We move down the section and fill through short connections instead of carrying water to every pot." Ray shook his head. "Now the simple pots need plumbing. Only for filling. The pots still release water on their own." Dana looked at the slope. "You keep it low pressure?" "Yes." "You test before connecting the full section?" "Yes." "And if it starts costing more water than the regular schedule allows?" "We stop." June waited. "Should I reserve the display?" Dana kept her eyes on Eli. This was the moment he had wanted. Permission. Expansion. Proof that mattered beyond one row. But Eli no longer wanted to say yes just to prove a point. "Reserve a smaller display," he told June. "I'd rather promise what we can protect." June smiled. "That works for me." The decision should have felt like victory. Instead, Eli looked at the stacked pots and felt the weight of every unused one. His first 6 had taught him that depth mattered. Spacing mattered. Soil contact mattered. Now success introduced something the small test had never needed to answer. Pressure. The first warning appeared before every pot was connected. The shared fill hose did not behave the same at both ends of the section. Near the upper row, the flow was gentle. Farther downhill, it pushed harder. Eli noticer. He reduced the supply. The lower flow softened, but the upper end filled too slowly. Dana stood beside him. "You said low pressure." "It is low." Everywhere. Eli looked down the slope. No. The answer bothered him. The whole reason for the shared hose was to save time without changing the way the pots themselves worked. But filling them together introduced a new weakness. Different points were receiving water under different conditions. Eli adjusted the sequence and opened fewer filling points at once. That helped. He marked the order in his notebook and told himself the remaining difference was manageable. For several days, expansion seemed to justify that decision. The deeper pots held moisture more steadily. The protected canes showed less afternoon stress. June stopped by once. You still comfortable with the display? Dana looked at Eli. The smaller one, he said. June nodded. Good. After she left, Ray looked over the rows. I'll admit one thing. Elevated. They looked better than I expected. It was not an apology. It was more than Eli had gotten before. Then one lower pot began losing water faster. Eli noticed during an evening check. He lifted the lid. The level was far below where it should have been. The next pot was low too. Another showed the same pattern. He followed the row uphill. The difference narrowed. At the first low pot, the soil was damp on one side. Too damp. Eli shut off the shared filling arrangement and marked the location. The next morning, he returned with Dana. The first cracked pot revealed itself as soon as they exposed enough soil to inspect it. A thin fracture ran down the clay wall. Not shattered. Cracked enough to leak far faster than the porous walls were meant to release water. Dana looked at him. One. I don't know yet. The next suspicious pot had another fracture. Then a third. All near the lower portion of the shared filling arrangement. Ray arrived. What happened? Eli looked toward the hose. I let too much pressure reach the low end. I thought you tested it. I did. Then why are they cracked? Eli did not defend himself. That was the question he had to answer to. 6 independently filled pots had taught him how depth and spacing affected moisture. They had not taught him what would happen when many fragile vessels shared one filling arrangement across uneven ground. The shared hose saved labor. It also allowed a problem in one section to matter to several pots at once. Dana pointed toward the saturated soil around the cracks. How much water did we lose? More than we should have. Enough to hurt the rows? I need to check. They walked the protected section. Most still looked acceptable. Then Eli reached 2 rows near the lower end. The leaves were softer. Several canes showed clear stress. He opened one intact pot. Nearly empty. Another was lower than its record predicted. His notebook had warned him the previous evening. But by then the weakness had already spread through the connected section. Ray looked at the stressed plants. Run the regular irrigation. Dana said nothing. Eli stared at the rows. Bloom was close. Stress now could cost them later, even if the canes recovered visibly. Ray repeated it. Fix it. The suggestion was reasonable. No sabotage had caused this. No one had interfered. The failure came from the limits of the system and Eli's decision to scale it with a shared filling path. Dana looked at him. You wanted responsibility. Eli nodded. This is part of it. Yes. Eli could replace the damaged pots. Lower the flow again. Tell himself the problem was only pressure. But that would leave the deeper weakness untouched. One filling path still tied too many fragile vessels together. If one section failed, the rest could lose water before he caught it. The experiment had succeeded when each pot acted as a slow local reserve. Expansion had weakened that strength by connecting too much of the filling process. Dana crouched beside one stressed cane. How much of June's order are you trying to protect? The answer Eli wanted to give was all of it. That was no longer honest. He opened his notebook. The original test section was still stable. The upper expanded rows had held better. The worst damage was concentrated where the shared filling pressure had exposed the weakness. Not all of it. Ray looked at him. What? Eli turned to Dana. We reduce what we're promising. You already reduced the display. It needs to be smaller again. Dana watched him. And the system? That changes too. By noon, the cracks had been isolated and the stressed rows were receiving attention under Dana's regular farm plan. No miracle recovery followed. The plants did not stand perfectly upright the moment water reached them. The damage had landed. 2 rows had been stressed at the worst possible time. June's order was at risk. So was Dana's trust. Dana offered Eli a clean exit. We can stop the expansion. Go back to conventional irrigation for the block. Keep the original test row if you want the data. It was reasonable. It would also leave the central problem unsolved. The farm would still face limited watering time, dry weather, and the need to protect the root zone without pretending it had more water than it did. Eli looked at the cracked pots. I don't want the shared hose. Donated. I want smaller groups. How small? Small enough that one leak can't drain the rest. The next version of the system would not make expansion faster. It would make failure smaller. Eli spent the afternoon removing connections instead of adding them. Dana stood beside the lower rows. You're sure you want to keep going? Oh. She looked at him. I'm sure I don't want to keep going the same way. 2 rows were stressed. Several pots were cracked. The easiest story Eli could have told himself was that the idea had worked until bad luck interfered. But bad luck had not put extra pressure into the low end. His design had. The slope had been visible. The flow difference had been visible. He had noticed both and still believed one shared arrangement was manageable because expansion had suddenly become valuable. Now he had to build around that weakness. He divided the remaining protected area into small independent cells. Each group would be filled separately at low pressure. No long common path. No single connection capable of draining the entire section. If one pot cracked, Eli wanted the problem to stop there. Ray watched him remove hose. So now you're making it slower again. Yes. That was the whole reason for the shared line. I know. And June is waiting for berries. I know. You can't solve everything by making it smaller. No. Eli pointed toward the cracked pots. But I can stop one mistake from becoming 6. Dana asked the harder question. What does smaller cost? Time. What else? Some of June's order. How much? I don't know until we see what holds. Then call her before you build anything else. That hurt more than digging up the broken pots. Eli wanted to call June after the redesign worked. Dana would not allow him to wait for good news. Responsibility meant reporting the loss before the recovery. June listened quietly while Eli explained that 2 rows had been stressed after several clay pots cracked during the expanded filling setup. He did not blame the weather. He did not say it had almost worked. He told her the protected volume would be smaller. How much smaller? June asked. I can't promise yet. Then don't. Eli looked at Dana. June continued. Tell me what you know you can deliver when you know it. I'll adjust the display. It was not forgiveness. It was a smaller commitment. Exactly what Eli needed. After the call, Dana asked, You still want to continue? Yes. Why? Because the first row still works. The original corrected test had never been exposed to the damaging shared pressure in the same way. Its levels still declined gradually. Its plants had held better. That proves the clay can work locally, Eli said. It doesn't prove I should connect everything. Dana nodded. Then build what you actually proved. Eli started there. Small cells. Independent filling. Low pressure. Visible refill marks. He simplified his records too. Normal decline meant the pots were releasing water. A sudden drop meant a problem. Ray helped move replacement pots under Dana's supervision. He did not make a single joke about flower pots. At one damaged row, Eli removed a cracked vessel and found the soil heavily saturated on one side. A few feet away, another plant had been too dry. The shared arrangement had not merely lost water. It had put it in the wrong place. Every time Eli was tempted to connect two cells for convenience, he stopped. Convenience had been the pressure that made the last design grow faster than his proof. By evening, the redesign looked less impressive. More separate fill points. Fewer protected rows. No neat common line for the whole section. Ray looked at it. That's uglier. Eli replaced a clay lid. Good. The next several days were not dramatic. That was what Eli wanted. He filled each cell carefully. Levels fell gradually. One group required more frequent attention because the surrounding soil dried faster. Instead of forcing every cell onto one schedule, Eli adjusted the refill timing for that location. Dana noticed. You're not trying to make them all match anymore. They don't need to. What do they need to do? Stay predictable. That became the new standard. Not perfect. Predictable enough that Eli could catch a failure before the plants paid for it. Then Dana carried a watering restriction notice into the raspberry block. Dry weather had tightened water use across the area. For 10 days, the farm would have less freedom to water when and how it wanted. Ray read the notice. Well, he looked at the separated clay pot cells. This is what you built them for. The timing could not have been worse. The raspberries were developing fruit. 2 rows had already lost margin. June's final display volume was still uncertain. Now the redesign would face the exact pressure that had made Eli bury the first pot. Limited water. Dry soil. No room for one hidden leak to drain everything else. Dana folded the notice. You can still switch the protected rows back to the conventional plan. Eli looked at the lids, then at his refill chart. If the cells can't handle this, I need to know now. Dana studied him. This time, she did not ask whether he was trying to prove a point. She only said, then we watched them closely. The first day of restriction felt almost too ordinary. Eli filled the cells within the farm's allowed schedule, checked each marked level, and closed every lid. The raspberry leaves were firm in the morning. By afternoon, the surface soil had dried pale again. The pots kept releasing water below it. On the second day, levels dropped gradually. On the third, one cell near the lower edge was falling faster than the rest. Eli stopped there. Before the redesign, that reading would have sent him walking the entire connected line, wondering how far the problem had traveled. Now he checked 3 pots. The first looked normal. The second was lower. The third had dropped sharply. Dana stood beside him. Crack. Maybe. They exposed only enough soil to inspect the pot. A hairline fracture showed along one side. Ray looked toward the neighboring cells. Are they losing too? Eli lifted the nearest lid. No. The next cell still held its expected level. So did the one beyond it. The damaged pot was leaking. The system was not. For several seconds, nobody said anything. That was the proof Eli had redesigned for. Not a system that could never fail. A system that could fail in one place without taking everything else with it. Dana pointed toward the damaged cell. What now? Isolate this one. Protect these plants under the farm schedule. Leave the others alone. Ray looked at him. You're not topping everything off? No. Why not? Because they don't need it yet. Months earlier, That answer would have sounded reckless coming from Eli. Now Dana only said, "Record it." The restriction continued. By day 5, the difference between stress and failure was becoming visible. The 2 rows damaged during the shared hose incident remained weaker. Some canes had recovered posture, but they had lost ground at a sensitive time. No later success would erase that. The independent cells behaved differently. Their levels declined at different rates, just as Eli expected. Some required attention sooner. Others held longer. None showed the sudden section-wide drop that had followed the shared filling failure. The redesign was slower to manage. That was real. Eli walked more. He checked more points. He could not pretend independent clay cells were the easiest way to irrigate an entire farm. But the protected raspberry section no longer depended on one path behaving perfectly everywhere. On day 7, the heat sharpened. Leaves along an unprotected edge softened by midday. Dana stopped beside one plant in the clay pot section and touched a leaf. Starting to show it. Eli checked the nearby pot. The level was low, but not unexpectedly so. "Do you refill?" "Not yet." Dana looked at him. Eli checked his chart. "This cell has been falling at the same rate. It's still inside the interval. That plant is softer." "Yes." "You're comfortable waiting?" He was not comfortable. That was different from being wrong. The old Eli would have filled the pot because Dana was watching. He would have treated extra water as proof of care. Now the restriction made every unnecessary refill a cost somewhere else. "We check again this evening." Dana nodded. No argument. No takeover. That trust frightened Eli more than supervision had. If he made the wrong call now, it would be his judgment Dana had trusted. That evening, the leaves recovered some posture as the heat dropped. The soil below the surface remained cool enough to show the buried moisture had not disappeared. The pot level was lower but still following its recorded pattern. Eli did not refill it. He wrote down the time. On day 8, Ray joined the morning checks without being asked. He carried Eli's clipboard. He read the cell marks aloud while Eli lifted lids. Cell 1 normal. Elinoid. Cell 2, a little faster. Still expected. Cell 3. Stable. Ray looked toward the isolated damaged group. And that one crack didn't affect these? Oh. Ray handed him the clipboard. That part worked. It was the first time he said it plainly. Not the whole idea. Not the harvest. That part. Eli appreciated the precision. By day 9, Dana stopped asking what every reading meant. She began asking what Eli planned to do about it. That was a different kind of authority. Not permission to control the farm. Responsibility to make a recommendation and explain it. At the top of one row, a pot began declining faster than its recent pattern. Eli checked the plant. No unusual stress. He checked the surrounding soil. Nothing suggested a major leak. Ray waited. Eli marked it for another check instead of digging immediately. Several hours later, the level had not fallen sharply. The change had been real, but not catastrophic. Under the old connected arrangement, he might have changed flow to the whole section. Now one uncertain reading remained one uncertain reading until evidence justified action. On the 10th day, the restriction reached its final scheduled check. The sky was clear. The soil between the rows crumbled dry. Eli walked the protected section with Dana and Ray. He started at the original test row. The first lid lifted. The level was low. Not empty. The second showed the same slow decline. Farther along, the independent cells had held unevenly, but predictably. One had required earlier refilling. One damaged cell had been isolated. The rest had continued without a system-wide drain. Dana walked to the 2 rows that had suffered during the shared filling failure. The contrast hurt. They were not dead. But fruit development was weaker and less even. The loss remained visible. Then she moved to the protected rows. The canes carried developing fruit. Not a miracle crop. Not proof drought no longer mattered. Proof that enough moisture had remained available, gradually and locally, for the plants to keep moving through fruit development under restricted watering. Ray stood between 2 rows and looked down at the round clay lids. "I thought these were toys." Eli said nothing. Ray glanced at him. "I was wrong." The words landed quietly. Dana did not turn the moment into a celebration. She inspected another plant, then another. Finally, she held out her hand. "Chart." Eli gave it to her. She studied the refill marks, the isolated leak, the different cell schedules, and the 10 days of entries. Then she folded the clipboard against her side. "These stay." Eli looked at her. "The pots?" "The cells, and the refill system stays separate." "Yes." "You keep checking them." "You mean after the restriction?" "I mean until Harvest tells us whether this actually paid." That stopped him. He had been so focused on the 10-day test that the next question had nearly disappeared behind it. The system had passed the physical verdict. A crack had stayed local. The protected rows had remained steadier. Fruit was developing. But June had not reserved a demonstration. She had reserved berries. Dana handed the chart back. "We know the rows held." She looked toward the canes. "Now we find out whether they held enough." The berries did not answer all at once. They answered slowly, cane by cane. In the days after the restriction, Eli kept walking the protected rows every morning. The 2 rows damaged during the shared hose failure remained behind. Their fruit clusters were lighter. Some berries never developed as fully as those on the better protected canes. Eli recorded that too. He did not remove the failed rows from the story simply because the redesign had worked later. They were the cost of learning too late that one convenient connection could turn a local weakness into a wider loss. The isolated cells told a different story. Their refill rates remained predictable. One needed attention more often. Another held longer in slightly heavier soil. The cracked pot from the restriction was replaced under Dana's supervision, but its cell remained separate. Nothing was reconnected for convenience. As harvest approached, June stopped asking Dana how many berries she expected. She waited. So did Eli. The first ripe picking was too small to settle anything. Dana sorted the fruit for sale, while Eli carried flats from the field. Ray worked beside him. Neither mentioned the clay pots. They did not need to. Every trip down the row passed the round lids between the canes. By the second picking, the pattern was clear. The protected rows were not producing the harvest Dana might have expected in a better watered season. But they were carrying more usable fruit than the rows that had taken the worst stress before bloom. Eli stood beside one damaged row and looked at the smaller clusters. Ray stopped beside him. "You still blaming yourself for those?" "I designed the shared line." "You also changed it after the damage." Ray nodded. "Yeah." He did not tell Eli to forget it. That helped more than an excuse would have. "I wanted the expansion to look efficient," Eli said. Ray gave a short laugh. "It did look efficient. Until it wasn't. That happens around here more than people admit." They carried the next flats toward the packing area. The real answer came near the end of the picking window. Dana had the marketable fruits sorted into the amount reserved for local sale. June arrived in her pickup and walked around to the tailgate. Eli watched Dana count the flats. He had done the calculation twice already. It was not the display they had first imagined when June saw the 4-day test row. It was smaller. Smaller even than Eli had hoped before the cracked pots. But it was enough for the reduced display June had finally agreed to hold. Dana looked at Eli. Load them. He stood still for half a second. Enough. Dana nodded. Enough. Only then did Eli let himself believe it. He and Ray loaded the flats. June checked the fruit, lifted one container, and turned it in her hand. These will work. No ceremony followed. No crowd. No sudden order 10 times larger. June closed the tailgate and confirmed the smaller farm stand display they had promised. The berries left because they were good enough to sell. That was enough. After the truck was gone, Eli returned to the raspberry block. Dana was already there. She held his refill chart. Eli assumed she wanted another entry. Instead, she said, "I'm filing this with the irrigation records." He looked at her. The clay pot chart? The drought chart. That name changed something. Not because the pots had become the farm's only answer. They had not. Dana still controlled the water. Conventional irrigation still served the larger operation. The clay cells had one specific job in one dry raspberry section, and Eli now understood their limits far better than when he buried the first 6. Dana handed him a fresh clipboard. Next dry spell, you handle the drought checks on this block. Eli looked down at it. By myself? You report to me. He nodded. You don't change excavation or expand anything without approval. I know. You don't promise sales volume. I know. And if the readings change in a way you don't understand, I stop and figure out why before I scale anything. Dana smiled slightly. That sounds familiar. Eli finally smiled too. Ray came down the lane carrying an empty berry flat. He looked at the clay lids. Months earlier, he would have found something to say about flower pots. This time he pointed toward one lower cell. That one was dropping faster yesterday, wasn't it? A little. You checking it tonight? Yes. Ray nodded. I'll be around. Then he kept walking. That was his apology. Not words about being proud. Changed behavior. Changed attention. Trust given one practical piece at a time. Late that evening, Eli made the final check. The sky above the raspberry block was clear and dry. Dust lay pale along the lane. Between the canes, the round clay lids formed a quiet line through the protected rows. Eli lifted one. Checked the level. Recorded it. Then replaced the lid. Behind him, the raspberry leaves remained green beneath the dry sky. And in Dana's farm records, his refill chart had a permanent place.